Information is the most common currency in the world. Whether it's tech companies giving you a free app or service in exchange for your data, or the silly little numbers on your mom's credit card, there is inherent value in something that one party knows but another does not. You might not realize it, but every game you play has a very carefully controlled set of information, things that the developers want you to know, and the things that they don't. At a high level, we're talking about future events, new updates and content, buffs and nerfs, etc., but at a more down-to-earth, gameplay-focused level, we need to think more along the lines of how much damage does this weapon do? How long does it take me to swap weapons? How long does it take to reload? And how much damage can my enemy deal to me? This type of information seems obvious, right? But think about the most recent game that you played. Does the game have a value that tells you exactly how long it takes to reload? More commonly, does the game actually give you damage values of your weapon or abilities? A lot of games very intentionally hide this information from the player, while other games make it a goal to be as transparent with these details as possible. But what's the big deal? What difference does it really make if the player knows or doesn't know how much damage each individual bullet deals? What would really change if you did or didn't know? For the more competitive of you watching, you might be thinking, well, obviously we need to know how much damage we're doing at any given time. While the more casual among you might wonder, does it matter if they tell us or not? Because we'll figure out these things on our own, which things work better than others. Believe it or not though, this dilemma of how much information do players need doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the conversation of casual versus competitive. In fact, how much info you're given in a game is based on much more complex concepts. The type of information that you receive in-game can be brought from one of two sources: reading the stats in the menu and finding out on your own. In a PvP multiplayer game like Call of Duty and Valorant, there's a lot of critical information that is necessary for players to know in order to have a fair fight. Exact damage values, damage drop-off over distances, and things like that. But the two games I gave as an example could not be more different in their approach to this information, but we'll get back to that in a minute. In a PvE multiplayer game like Helldivers 2, there's no competition between players, and that gives the developers a lot more freedom in how they can opt to give or withhold information to the players fighting against hordes of bugs, robots, and zombies. Let's take a look at what information is given to the player. Each weapon obviously has a different set of stats: damage, capacity, recoil, and fire rate. But each weapon has traits that make them unique. Things like armor penetration, explosive, one-handedness, rounds reload, and a lot more. Let's talk about the explosive trait. Self-explanatory, right? Well, when you consider that some explosions aren't big enough to close bug holes, but some are, the curtain starts to peel back a little. If all explosive weapons have subtle differences in their explosive properties, then what does explosive even mean in this context? Well, to get to that answer, it's dependent on what kind of rounds are being fired. Concussive rounds, plasma rounds, jet rounds, regular, armor piercing, etc., etc. But this information isn't given to the player. You have to find this out on your own and do your best to figure out why something is working or why it's not. And the rabbit hole goes way deeper. But let's contextualize all this information. The developers give you the info about what your weapons do and what damage each individual bullet does, but what they don't tell you is how much health the enemies have. This is because Helldivers has a pretty complex damage system, and even though data miners have figured out exactly how much health every enemy has across all of their different limbs and body parts, which kind of ruins the fun, it doesn't get in the way of just how the game itself presents relevant information to the player, using icons and hit markers to communicate if you're being effective against any given enemy type or not, and more importantly, your own victories and successes on each planet against every enemy type and objective. Is your loadout actively serving your playstyle, or is there something you're missing in order to spread democracy a little more efficiently? Now let's talk about the differences between different competitive multiplayer titles. In COD, you can find out detailed weapon stats by going through the gunsmith system and customizing your weapons based on specific stats. Firepower, accuracy, mobility, and handling are the 4 different areas that every attachment will adjust. And within these, there are a lot of subcategories that you'll need to pay attention to depending on what kind of build you're trying to go for. In Valorant, every gun is the exact same, and you can find the stats of every weapon to the side of the buy menu. Damage, run speed, equip speed, reload speed, and even some advanced information on how your weapon zooms when you ADS, how it affects the fire rate and move speed, and a ton of individual detail for each weapon. But this is going to be the same for each player, a very big difference between a tac shooter like Valorant and an arcade shooter like COD. So if these games are giving us weapon damage values, then we should know everything, right? Well, not exactly. Take a moment right now and think about what these games don't tell you. In COD, you might know exactly how much damage you do, but you don't know how much health the enemy has. You know they have 100, you can tell if they're using a stim or if they have battle rage, which means they take less damage, but there's no health bars. This creates an opportunity for players to develop skills to gauge how much health they have after you land a few shots. On the other hand, you also don't know how much health you have. Again, of course, you have 100 HP, but when the bar starts to drop, you can't clearly tell exactly how much damage you've been dealt. So even if you know, yes, they have an AS Val which does 22 damage to the body at effective range, you don't know if you have 22 HP left or 23 HP, which would be the decider between 1 and 2 bullets. But again, you will be able to get a feel for this over time. This design is fully intentional, and this is often referred to as implicit skill development or soft skills. Let's take a look at Valorant again. With a super competitive TAC shooter like Valorant, having all of the information is extremely important. But the way that that information is withheld is slightly different. You know how much damage a weapon does or how long a smoke lasts, but do you know how fast the recoil will reset after you spray a Phantom or Vandal? Do you know the different sound cues for different abilities? Do you know how long until the enemy has their flash again? These gaps in knowledge allow players to develop these implicit skills and act as a way for developers to ensure that there is a healthy skill ceiling for the game. A skill ceiling involves players refining and mastering more nuanced mechanics over time. The concept of implicit skill development encourages players to push beyond basic mechanics in a way that pure numbers would not be able to, requiring the player to use intuition, pattern recognition, and situational awareness in order to gain a competitive edge. Now, thinking about these two games, let's think about all the small things that you might not know. In COD, how much health does a vehicle have? How much damage does a wall do when you hit it? How much damage does the explosion do when the car explodes, and from how far away? In Valorant, how far can I bounce this utility off a wall if I jump throw versus a regular throw? If spawns flip, how long will the enemy runout time be? How much noise can I make before I'm spotted? How long until the enemy's cooldowns reset? Lastly, let's take a look at Marvel Rivals, which does a few things opposite of Val and COD. For starters, Marvel Rivals doesn't tell you how much damage any specific ability or character does, but you know how much health each character has, and you even see your enemy's health bars, so this isn't too hard to figure out, but it takes time and research on the player's part to do so. This isn't necessarily a skill ceiling or even a skill floor. This falls into a third category, meta learning. It's distinct from the skill floor or the skill ceiling because it involves external research, experimentation, and observation to gain understanding of skills that aren't necessarily tied to in-game mechanics alone. It's not a skill floor because the game gives you enough information to play without needing precise damage values, and players can still succeed even at intermediate levels without knowing exactly how much damage each ability or attack deals. It's not directly a skill ceiling because while understanding damage values and health helps to optimize strategy, it's not about mastering in-game mechanics like recoil control or timing abilities. Instead, it's about accumulating knowledge through external effort. That's why this would be considered a meta-learning aspect, where it's a system that inherently rewards players who invest time outside of their matches, watching videos, reading guides, or testing different interactions. It taps into knowledge mastery as a layer of progression, bridging what's learned in-game through trial and error with research done externally. In Valorant, you know exactly what damage you'll do, but there are so many abilities and strategies at play that you might not get the chance to do damage at all. In COD, you know exactly how much damage you can deal, but you have no idea if the enemy is using something with a higher TTK or just how many more shots you need to land to finish them off. With Helldivers, you kind of know how much damage you're doing, but you also kind of don't know how much health the enemies have to begin with. And with Marvel Rivals, you know exactly how much health you have and exactly how much health the enemy has, but regardless, you have no idea how many more punches, blasts, or bullets it might take depending on how much sustain they have from their teammates or how much damage mitigation they might have from some other thing. So, to sum it up, we can see a common thread in the way that game developers manage and present information, and how that presentation profoundly impacts how players are able to play the game, think about the game, strategize within the game, and improve over time. In COD and Valorant, this comes through for balance reasons, where carefully curated sets of information revealing weapon stats while hiding recoil recovery timing can ensure implied skill development. Whereas in Helldivers 2, the lack of knowledge of enemy health and super nuanced weapon mechanics are built specifically to enhance teamwork and experimentation within a co-op multiplayer environment. To contrast with other competitive titles, Marvel Rivals flips the script, shifting the burden of learning to deliberate external research and observation, where mastering meta-knowledge and meta-learning is just as vital as in-game mechanics. If you enjoyed this style of content, consider subscribing and leaving a like to help me out through my content journey in 2025. I'll be making videos around esports, gaming, and the greater industries surrounding both. So if there's anything you'd like me to talk about, leave a comment and let's chat about it. Thanks for watching, and don't worry, you'll see me around.